Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I pulled up to the curb slower than I meant to, like my foot just decided to hesitate before the brake could fully do its job. The Miller house hadn't changed much, not on the outside anyway. Same pale yellow siding that always peeled near the gutters. Same lopsided birdhouse on the porch my dad once built during a rare sober weekend. The driveway was crammed with familiar cars and one rental with out-of-state plates that told me Bethany was here too, which figured. The air was thick with that kind of suburban heat that makes your skin feel like it's being slowly shrink-wrapped. From the backyard, I could already hear the low buzz of conversation, beer cans snapping open, country music playing too loud through an old Bluetooth speaker that probably belonged to Jake. The moment I stepped through the side gate, I felt it, that shift in energy, like someone just changed the channel to something nobody wanted to watch. Linda saw me first. She was standing over the grill like she owned the smoke, wearing a floral apron that said Grill Sergeant, even though she'd never once let my dad cook unsupervised. Her eyes landed on me with that fixed, polished smile that always meant trouble was coming wrapped in something sweet. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, not quite yelling, not quite warm. "I told your brother you wouldn't come." But he held out hope. She waved the spatula like it was a damn baton in a parade. I smiled and walked toward her, every step pulling 10 years of swallowed words up my spine like splinters. Jake was by the cooler, popping the cap off a bottle of craft beer like he'd just invented it. He looked good, because of course he did. That was Jake's whole thing, aging like a man who still believed in high school trophies and charm that didn't need maintenance. He came over and hugged me like he meant it, but I could feel how careful it was, like he didn't want to get anything on him. "You look great, Sam. Seriously, you've been working out." I rolled my eyes, but let it slide. Megan stood nearby, holding a tray of deviled eggs, her face all politeness and years of marriage fatigue. She smiled at me like we were in on something private, and maybe we were, but I wasn't sure what it was yet. The thing about a family barbecue is that nothing is ever really about the food. It's about who shows up, who doesn't, who brings store-bought macaroni salad, and who judges them for it. It's about who used to sit where before someone stopped being invited, and who keeps bringing that up under the breath of a compliment. Bethany waved at me from the folding table under the maple tree, where she'd already set up shop with her Diet Coke and sunglasses, gossiping to a second cousin about someone's vasectomy reversal like it was community news. She looked me up and down the way people do when they want to pretend they're impressed, but also want to check if your shoes are from Target. I didn't say much for the first hour. I played along, ate a burger that was too dry, smiled when someone asked if I was still doing that thing in publishing, whatever that meant. Jake told a story about his latest promotion, and everyone clapped like he'd just solved world hunger. Linda beamed like a mother of the year, despite the fact that Jake's job required him to travel every other week and probably see a marriage counselor on the off weeks. Still, they loved him. They always did. He was the Miller who made the right choices, even when he didn't. I waited for it. I knew it was coming. You don't show up after almost 10 years without someone needing to poke you with a stick to see what spills out. It happened when we were all sitting around the table, plastic forks scratching at paper plates, the smell of lighter fluid and citronella swirling together like nostalgia and rage. Linda turned to me, ever so gently, like she was setting up for a joke everyone already knew the punchline to. "You should think about settling down," she said, with the kind of tone that pretends to care, but really just wants to cut. "You're not getting any younger, sweetheart." The world didn't stop, but it slowed. Jake looked away. Megan blinked twice. Bethany froze mid-bite like someone had pressed pause on her jaw. I felt the corners of my mouth curl before I even realized what I was doing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Already did," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You just weren't part of that chapter." Silence. You know the kind of silence where even the birds shut up? That. Linda's mouth hung open, just a little, like maybe a gnat flew in and short-circuited her ability to speak. Megan coughed. Jake frowned like he was trying to do the math. And Bethany? She just stared at me, eyes narrowing like she was flipping through some memory that didn't sit right. That was the moment I knew she suspected something. Maybe she always had. I stood up, brushing the crumbs off my lap, and walked over to toss my plate. I didn't look back at them until I reached the cooler, pulled out a water, and twisted the cap. I took a long sip and then met Bethany's eyes. She flinched, just barely. Like she knew there was more coming and she wasn't ready. Good. Neither was anyone else. There was a time when I believed I could compartmentalize my life like a junk drawer, just shove in what didn't fit and slam it closed before anything spilled out. But you learn, eventually, that drawers swell and hinges weaken, and the past has a way of forcing itself open whether you're ready or not. I was 25 when I met him, though it felt like I'd lived an entire life before that moment, mostly spent being who everyone else needed me to be. I was still trying to make my family proud back then, still shaving the edges off of myself, smiling through Sunday church, calling my mom every Thursday because that's what good daughters do. But that year, everything started to shift, like a floorboard creaking under a secret you'd buried beneath the rug. His name was Mark, not that it mattered, because no one in that backyard would ever speak his name without swallowing it like a curse. He wasn't dangerous or wild or anything cliché like that. In fact, he was quiet, careful with his words, steady in ways that unsettled me. He worked in community outreach, helped with housing programs, and read more nonfiction than anyone I'd ever dated. But the part that made him radioactive to the Millers? He was divorced, 10 years older than me, and had a mixed-race daughter from his first marriage. Just saying all that out loud in front of my mother once had felt like I'd confessed to lighting the church nativity set on fire. I remember the night I told Linda I was seeing someone. I was back home for Easter, wearing a floral dress she insisted on lending me, and somewhere between the ham and the apple pie, she asked, "So are you seeing anyone these days?" And when I answered, her smile twitched, almost imperceptibly, before she covered it with her napkin and said, "Well, I'm sure it's just a phase. You always did like the complicated ones." That was the moment I knew I'd never bring him to that table. It was also the moment I started planning my exit from this entire family dynamic, like a prison break with a 2-year timeline. Fast forward to the present. The barbecue, the tension, the sideways glances that made me feel like an old ghost no one wanted to admit they saw. Megan cornered me near the patio table where someone had laid out every pasta salad known to man. She wasn't aggressive about it, just curious in that way people get when their lives are falling apart in slow motion and they're looking for someone who cracked first. "So," she said, tilting her head like she was choosing her words carefully, "when you said you'd already settled down, was that just to shut Linda up, or—" I smiled because I knew she meant well, but I also knew she wouldn't stop until I gave her something to chew on. "We eloped in 2006, I said, reaching for a scoop of potato salad I had no intention of eating. "The week I turned 29. Which, yeah, I know. That would have made me 34 back then." I said it casually, too casually, and she nodded along like it made perfect sense. But I could tell her eyes shifted for half a second, like her brain just stubbed its toe on the math. That was the moment I gave the viewers something to comment on, whether they realized it or not. Megan didn't ask who "we" was. She didn't have to. I think she understood the weight in the word. The fact that I said "we eloped" and not "I got married" said everything. She glanced over her shoulder, and I followed her gaze to where Linda was lurking near the grill, pretending to be deeply interested in aluminum foil. She wasn't watching us, not directly, but her shoulders were too still. Linda has this thing where she freezes when she's eavesdropping, like her body thinks if it stays absolutely motionless, she becomes invisible. I leaned closer to Megan then, lowering my voice just enough. "I didn't tell them because I knew what they'd do," I said. "They'd pick it apart, call it impulsive or shameful, blame him, blame me, maybe both. They'd do that thing where they act like love's a diagnosis, and they've got the cure." Megan looked like she wanted to say something, Maybe something kind, maybe something stupid, but she didn't get the chance. Bethany called from across the yard, asking Megan to help carry the cupcakes inside, and just like that, the moment passed. But I saw Linda straighten her back and turn away, like she'd heard enough and was going to pretend she didn't. She always did that, pretend like her silence was a moral stance instead of cowardice dressed in pearls. I walked over to the garden and stood by the hydrangeas for a while, remembering the first time I'd ever brought Mark flowers, how awkward he looked holding them, like he didn't quite believe he deserved them. He was like that, always surprised by kindness. We got married in a courthouse with broken AC and a witness who smelled like onions, and it was still better than any fancy wedding I'd imagined as a kid. He made me believe I could be more than just someone's disappointment. I never introduced him to the family, not once. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew what they'd do. Because I knew they'd look at him and see all the wrong things: his past, his skin, his daughter, and none of the reasons I loved him. And when someone shows you, again and again, that they're willing to ruin anything they don't understand, eventually you stop giving them anything to destroy. That's why I vanished. That's why I let them believe I'd run away to chase a job, or a fantasy, or some selfish need for space. I left because I found something real, and I wasn't going to let them infect it with their rules and judgments and twisted sense of righteousness. The chapter they missed was the one where I was the most myself. And they missed it because they didn't want to read it in the first place. From the outside, Jake's life looked like a glossy postcard someone keeps sending to make you feel bad about where you ended up. The house with the brick facade and symmetrical shutters, the spotless SUV in the driveway, the wife who smiled at all the right times, and the kids who wore matching shirts to Christmas Eve service. But I'd lived long enough to know that sometimes the prettier the picture, the more cracks there are underneath the frame, and Jake had plenty of them if you knew where to look. You just had to squint past the charm and dig beneath the manicured front lawn. After dinner, while Linda gathered up half-eaten corn cobs and foam plates, and the others drifted off into small talk and lawn chairs, I found Jake leaning against the fence near the garage, sipping another overpriced IPA like it might teach him how to be satisfied. He looked up when I walked over, gave me the kind of smile that comes with strings attached, and said, "You really stirred up the pot today." I shrugged, letting the silence do most of the talking, because I knew what he really meant. He meant I'd made everyone uncomfortable by existing as a version of myself that didn't need their approval. He took another sip, avoiding eye contact now, and I realized that despite his polished exterior, there was still that same scared kid buried in him, the one who needed to be the favorite, who panicked whenever something didn't align with the narrative Linda had crafted like a family brand. "You didn't come here just to eat a dry burger and make Mom twitch," he said, half joking. "What are you really doing here, Sam?" And that was the moment. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment the smile dropped off my face and I saw his eyes shift just a fraction, like maybe some part of him already knew what was coming. "You remember Emma?" I asked, voice low but steady. His hand froze midway to his mouth, bottle hovering in the air like a prop he forgot how to use. "From high school?" he asked, playing dumb. Too fast, too rehearsed. I took a step closer, not threatening, just deliberate. "No, Jake. Not from high school. From right before I left. The girl who worked at the bookstore downtown, the one you dated for about 15 minutes before Mom decided she wasn't a good fit for the Miller family tree." His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. And in that pause, I laid it out, the memory neither of us had spoken aloud in over a decade. How Emma had come to me crying, scared out of her mind, the night she found out she was pregnant. How she hadn't told anyone else yet, just me, because she thought I could help. How Jake, when I confronted him, denied it at first, then tried to make it sound like a misunderstanding, like she was just looking for attention. And how Linda, when she found out, told me that some mistakes needed to be handled quietly, as if we were in a damn soap opera instead of real life. But the worst part, the part that still burned in my chest even after all this time, was what came after. Linda convinced Emma not to press anything formal, not to talk to anyone, and then convinced me to talk her into leaving town. It was me who drove her to the bus station that rainy Tuesday morning, me who held her hand as she sobbed, me who watched the girl my brother broke disappear like a secret being erased. And then, of course, I was the one who got blamed when the story started circling, people whispering that I'd done something shameful, that I'd gotten into trouble and run off. Linda never corrected them. Jake never stepped up. And just like that, I became the family scapegoat because keeping his image intact was more important than my dignity or Emma's life. I took the fall, I said, my voice sharper now, no longer hiding the raw edges. I left so your golden boy life could keep shining, so Mom wouldn't have to admit her perfect son did something unforgivable. And you let me. You fucking let me. Jake looked like someone had punched him in the throat, but still, he said nothing. Not even sorry. Just stood there, stunned and shamefaced, like he couldn't decide if he was angry I brought it up or angry at himself for knowing it was true. I came back to make sure no one forgets what really happened in 2012, I said finally, stepping away from the fence. Because I'm done carrying the weight of your sins like they were mine to begin with. His mouth opened again, but I didn't wait for the apology that wouldn't come. I walked back into the yard, like I hadn't just lit a match and tossed it at the foundation of the family myth. Megan watched me from the porch, her eyes narrowing like she could feel the tension crackling around us, and Bethany's voice carried from the kitchen window, still gossiping like nothing had shifted. But something had. Something big. Jake might have still looked like the golden boy to them, but I'd seen the rot underneath, and now that I'd peeled back the paint, it was only a matter of time before the rest of it started to fall apart. And maybe, just maybe, they deserved to watch it crumble. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting that long golden light across the backyard, the kind of light that always looks better in pictures than it feels in real life. Someone had lit citronella candles around the picnic table, and the speaker had switched to old rock ballads that Jake probably thought made him seem nostalgic, instead of just stuck in time. The grill had gone cold, the plates had been cleared, and the cooler was now half empty, filled with floating ice water and cheap beer. And like every family gathering that goes on a little too long, the smiles had begun to stiffen, the jokes were starting to bite a little harder, and the liquor was peeling back the masks everyone wore to keep things nice. Bethany had been working the patio all night like she was auditioning for a role she was already too old to play, flipping her hair, whispering in ears, laughing too loudly at stories she didn't care about. It was only a matter of time before she cracked open whatever she'd been sitting on all day, and as usual, she chose the worst possible moment to do it. I was standing near the garden, sipping a glass of something pink and artificially sweet, when I heard her voice float across the yard like poison on the breeze. I just think it's interesting, she said, her tone pitched with faux innocence, that no one knew Sam was married, and now, suddenly, she's talking about some big love story we were all left out of. Someone murmured in response, and Bethany, never one to leave well enough alone, pressed forward like a dog sniffing out blood. I mean, don't you find it suspicious that she never introduced him? Never posted about him? Nothing. Almost like she was hiding him for a reason. And now she's back, saying he's gone, but there's no pictures, no proof. I mean, who is he? Megan was the one who heard it. She'd been inside grabbing more napkins or maybe just taking a moment to breathe, but when she came out and caught the tail end of that comment, something in her snapped. I'd never seen her move that fast. She crossed the lawn in long strides, her jaw set, her eyes sharp and wet with fury. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She looked straight at Bethany and said, his name was Daniel, and he was Jake's best friend. Or at least he used to be before Jake threw him under the bus to save his own ass. The yard fell silent the way it always does in moments like that, when the truth is suddenly louder than the music. I didn't move. I let Megan have her moment, because God knows she'd earned it. Bethany's face twisted, like she'd bitten into something sour, and Jake, who had been chatting with one of the cousins near the fire pit, froze mid-sentence. It was the first time I'd seen panic on his face all night, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. I stepped forward then, because it was time. Time to stop letting them tell pieces of the story and finally put the damn puzzle together. His name was Daniel Hayes, I said, my voice clear but shaking slightly, not from fear but from the weight of it all finally surfacing. He and Jake were inseparable from middle school through college. You all remember that, right? He was at our house more than he was at his own. Mom used to call him her third child. Linda's face went cold. Not surprised. Just frozen, like someone being asked to answer for a crime they'd already buried. He was brilliant, I continued. Kind. Quiet. The kind of man who held doors and remembered birthdays. And he loved Jake like a brother. Which made it all the worse when Jake set him up to take the fall for that insider trading mess. Remember that? When Jake's firm got investigated, and somehow his name stayed out of the press, but Daniel's didn't. Jake stepped forward, stammering, "You don't know what you're talking about," but I cut him off. "Don't insult me. I know exactly what happened. Daniel took the blame because he thought you'd make it right. Because he trusted you. And Mom? She stood behind you. She said it would be better this way, that Daniel didn't have a family name to protect, that he'd recover. But he didn't." Now they were all staring. Not at me. At Jake. At Linda. At each other. And for the first time, no one had anything clever or polite or dismissive to say. I looked over at Megan, who nodded slowly, silently confirming the truth she had clearly suspected for years. "I loved him," I said. "More than anyone I've ever known. We got married in secret because I didn't want your opinions contaminating something so pure. We built a life together, even if it was short. And when he lost everything, his job, his reputation, his confidence, he still tried to stay hopeful. For me. For us." I paused then, letting the silence fill the space between my words like thunder rolling in before a storm. "He's dead now," I said finally, my voice low and steady, "and you all buried him twice. The first time was when you let Jake destroy his name. The second was when you made me believe staying silent was the only way to survive. And now? Now I'm done being quiet." The next morning was quiet in that hollow way, like the world knew it had overstayed its welcome and didn't quite know how to apologize for the mess. The air was heavy with that post-party silence, the kind that settles over folding chairs still littered with napkins and half-empty bottles, as if even the furniture was too ashamed to move. No one spoke much when I came down the stairs that morning. Not Jake, not Megan, not Bethany, not even Linda, who had taken to cleaning aggressively, as if scrubbing grease off the stove might erase the words I had said the night before. They all avoided eye contact, acting like I might explode again if someone so much as asked if I wanted coffee. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't want small talk. I didn't even say goodbye. I just took the manila envelope I had packed in my bag the night before and slid it under my arm as I stepped out into the morning light, my boots crunching across the gravel as I walked to my rental car. It was a 20-minute drive to the cemetery, the kind that passes in a blur of trees and cracked pavement, with old country songs humming low through the speakers. The kind of songs that always sound like they were written for people who lost something they never deserved to lose. His grave was near the edge of the hill, under a crooked pine tree that leaned just enough to look tired. I stood there for a long time before saying anything, letting the breeze do the talking, letting the guilt rise and settle in my chest like smoke from a fire I didn't start, but still let burn. I hadn't visited in a while, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, because sometimes grief has a way of turning you into a coward without you even realizing it. The headstone was simple, just his initials, not his full name, not his story. That had always been the plan, to keep some things just for us. I pulled the letter out from my coat pocket, creased, weathered, read too many times to count, and unfolded it with the kind of care you give to something sacred, or dangerous, or both. I started reading out loud, even though I knew every word by heart. He had written it a few weeks before he died, back when the weight of the lies and the betrayal had finally broken whatever part of him was still holding out hope. He didn't write it in anger. He never was the type for rage. He wrote it with the calm devastation of someone who understood the world would never give him justice, and that the people who had hurt him would keep smiling at barbecues like nothing ever happened. In the letter, he named no one directly. That was his last kindness. But he pointed enough fingers to leave no doubt. He spoke about trust, about brotherhood, about what it feels like to be thrown away by people who claim to love you. He said he forgave me, even though I didn't deserve it, even though I had let myself disappear into silence when I should have screamed the truth from rooftops. And then, in the final lines, he wrote something that gutted me every time. If they ever ask why I gave up, tell them I didn't. I just stopped trying to prove I belonged. I folded the letter, kissed the top edge of the stone, and left a fresh copy tucked behind a rock at the base. Then I drove straight back to the house, where the family was still pretending the world hadn't shifted. I handed each person their own envelope, no words, no explanation, just paper heavy with consequence. Megan opened hers immediately, tears forming before she even reached the second paragraph. Jake held his like it might burn him. Linda? She didn't open hers at all. She stared at it like I'd handed her a bomb and dared her to light the fuse. She followed me out onto the porch, clutching the envelope like a relic. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling under its usual steel. I turned to her slowly, measured, like I was giving her one last chance to be human. You did it first, I said. You did it when you told me to lie. When you taught me that family means silence, even if someone dies choking on it. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked down those steps for the last time, climbed into the car, and headed out of town, passing all the same cracked sidewalks and faded signs I'd memorized as a teenager. Somewhere just outside the city limits, there's a lake no one ever talks about. A place we used to drive past on the way to camp, the kind of place that's always quiet and slightly forgotten. I stopped the car, got out, and stood at the water's edge for a moment. Then I pulled Linda's necklace from my coat pocket, the gold cross she'd given me as a kid, for protection, the same one I hadn't worn in over 20 years. I stared at it for a beat, letting the chain dangle from my fingers like it weighed more than it should. Then I threw it into the lake with a flick of my wrist, watching it disappear into the gray water without a splash, like it had never existed at all. I didn't come back to reconnect. I didn't come back for forgiveness. I came back to reclaim the truth. And sometimes, the cleanest revenge isn't loud, isn't violent, isn't even cruel. Sometimes, it's handing people the weight of what they did and walking away while they decide whether to carry it or drown beneath it. And as for Daniel, no, you'll never know his full name. Because some chapters belong only to the people who live them. And this one? This is the chapter you won't be in.